A structure built to defy a continent is now facing a desperate race against physics. And if it fails, the consequences are almost unimaginable. Right now, on the border of Zambia and Zimbabwe, a single concrete wall holds back 180 billion tons of water. That is the world's largest man-made reservoir. A weight so colossal, it literally triggers earthquakes in the planet's crust. But the greatest threat to this dam is not a crack. It is not an earthquake, it is an invisible enemy, an underwater canyon being carved out by the very water the dam is meant to control, eating its way back toward the foundations every single day. What's the most audacious piece of engineering you've ever heard of? Let us know in the comments below. That erosion has created a crater 90 meters deep at the dam's base. And if it reaches the foundations, the entire 128-meter tall wall could fail, releasing a wave of water that would threaten the lives of 3.5 million people across 3 countries. Not a leak. Not a scare. A complete and total collapse. An incredible number of you who watch these stories haven't subscribed. If you value this kind of deep dive, hitting that button is the single most important way to support us. It's urgent for the channel to survive. Don't let it slip your mind. Now, let's begin. So, the 2 nations responsible for the dam did something unprecedented. They launched a $300 million operation to blast and reshape the bedrock at the foot of a fully operational dam. A procedure so delicate that a single miscalculation could trigger the very catastrophe they are trying to prevent. The project is a monumental gamble. So the real question is, did they just undertake one of the most brilliant engineering rescues in history, or did they just start a countdown on a disaster that cannot be stopped? The Kariba Dam was never supposed to be gentle. It was born from colonial ambition and geological force. In the 1950s, the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland, a British colonial project, needed power. Specifically, it needed vast, cheap electricity to fuel the burgeoning copper mines of what was then northern Rhodesia, the engine of an empire's wealth. The Zambezi River, the 4th longest in Africa, was the obvious, terrifying solution. A river that could swell into a raging torrent during flood season, a force of nature that had carved its path through the continent over millennia. Taming it was considered an act of both progress and conquest. The site chosen was the Kariba Gorge, a narrow chasm of basalt and gneiss rock that offered the perfect pinch point to erect a wall against the water. The chief designer was a Frenchman named André Coin, a world-renowned engineer and a master of the double-curvature concrete arch dam. His design was a thing of frugal genius. Unlike a massive gravity dam which relies on its own colossal weight to hold back water, an arch dam acts more like an architectural shell. It is thin, elegant, and strong. It transfers the immense hydrostatic pressure of the water outwards, into the solid rock of the gorge walls. It becomes one with the mountain. This design saved millions of pounds and years of construction time. It was a testament to human ingenuity, and it contained a fatal flaw, an original sin embedded in its very design, one that would not become fully apparent for decades. The contract to build it was won by an Italian consortium, Impregilo. In 1955, work began. It was a brutal, monumental undertaking. Thousands of workers, many of them Italian and local African laborers, toiled in relentless heat. The river itself fought back. In 1958, a once-in-a-thousand-year flood tore through the construction site, destroying the cofferdam and the access bridge, setting the project back months. The river was reminding them who was in charge. But the engineers rebuilt. They pushed on, and in December 1958, the dam wall was sealed. The Zambezi River began to back up. Its ancient flow arrested for the first time in history. Lake Kariba began to form. But this act of creation was also an act of destruction. Spread along the fertile banks of the Zambezi Valley were the Tonga people, a community of approximately 57,000 souls whose entire way of life was intrinsically tied to the river's rhythm. Their land, their farms, their sacred sites, and their ancestral homes were about to be submerged under hundreds of feet of water. Their spiritual traditions were deeply connected to the Zambezi, personified by the river god Nyami Nyami, a serpent-like spirit believed to control the river's life. The dam was seen as a direct violation of this sacred order. The elders warned that Nyami Nyami, separated from his wife on the other side of the dam wall, would one day destroy the structure to be reunited with her. The forced relocation of the Tonga people was swift and often brutal. They were moved to less fertile lands, their communities shattered, their connection to the river severed forever. It is a human cost that is not recorded in the dam's official specifications, a brutal footnote in a story of progress. The displacement of the Tonga people is a brutal piece of this story. Do you think mega projects like this can ever be justified, given the immense human and environmental cost? The debate is complex, and we want to hear your perspective. On May 17, 1960, the dam was officially opened by Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. It was a symbol of technological triumph, a beacon of modernity in the heart of Africa, powering cities and mines. It was an engineering marvel, and it was already beginning to sow the seeds of its own potential failure. The problem wasn't the wall. The concrete arch designed by Andre Coyne was and remains a masterpiece of structural integrity. The problem was what happens when you have to release water from it. The dam was equipped with 6 spillway gates designed to release excess water during major floods. But because of the arch design, the water doesn't slide down a gentle slope. It is released in a free jet, a torrent of water that falls over 90 meters, essentially creating a series of massive man-made waterfalls. This water, traveling at immense speed, hits the unlined riverbed at the base of the dam with cataclysmic force. The rock in the Kariba Gorge, while strong enough to anchor the dam, is a mix of basalt and gneiss that was never meant to withstand that kind of punishment. As early as 1962, just a few years after operations began, surveys detected the first evidence of scouring. The waterfalls were carving a hole, and that hole would just keep getting bigger. Before we explore the sheer scale of the hole being carved under the dam, it's essential to understand the scale of the object creating it. Lake Kariba is not a lake. It is an inland ocean. It holds 185 billion cubic meters of water. That is a number so large it becomes abstract. To put that in terms that mean something, it is enough water to supply the entire city of London for 300 years. It is more than double the volume of all the lakes in England's famous Lake District combined. The surface area covers over 5,500 square kilometers, visible from space as a vast, shimmering scar on the continent. The weight of that water is 185 billion metric tons. That weight, pressing down on a region of the African Rift Valley, a geologically active zone, is so immense that it has literally altered the Earth's crust. Since the lake was filled, scientists have documented a phenomenon known as reservoir-induced seismicity. The immense load lubricates existing fault lines and creates new stresses. Over 20 earthquakes of magnitude 5 or greater on the Richter scale have been recorded in the Kariba area since the 1960s. The dam didn't just stop a river, it became a geological force in its own right, a man-made earthquake machine. This is the kind of story that affects millions, but is rarely understood. If you think this deep dive is important, please hit the like button and consider sharing it. It helps more people understand the stakes, especially if you have family or friends interested in engineering or global events. But the story of Kariba's creation has one more extraordinary chapter. As the waters of the Zambezi began to rise, they didn't just displace people. They stranded tens of thousands of animals on what were once hilltops, now rapidly shrinking islands. The project's leaders had given little thought to the wildlife, but one man did, a game warden in then northern Rhodesia named Rupert Fothergill. He saw the impending catastrophe and refused to let it happen. Between 1958 and 1964, Fothergill led a mission that became legendary. Operation Noah, with a small team of volunteers and a fleet of makeshift boats, they launched one of the largest wildlife rescue operations in human history. They rescued over 6,000 animals, not just small creatures like monkeys, snakes, and honey badgers. They rescued zebras, impalas, and rhinos. They tranquilized and moved entire herds of elephants, coaxing confused and terrified giants onto rafts and ferrying them to the new mainland shore. For 6 years, they faced down charging buffalo, crocodiles, and the rising water itself. Operation Noah was an incredible act of conscience, a counter-narrative of compassion running parallel to the story of displacement and destruction. It was proof that even in the midst of a project defined by overwhelming force, individual will could still choose to save what was being lost. And yet the dam's fundamental physics remained. The water kept falling, and the hole kept digging. For decades, the problem at the dam's base was a slow-motion crisis, documented in technical reports and engineering conferences. The plunge pool, as it's called, was steadily deepening. The force of the 6 spillway jets, when opened, was acting like a hydraulic chisel, plucking and scouring the bedrock, sending plumes of sediment downstream. By the early 2010, as advanced sonar surveys revealed a terrifying reality. The hole was no longer a simple depression. It had become a crater, a vast underwater canyon up to 90 meters deep. That's a hole as deep as a 30-story building, carved into solid rock, just a few hundred meters from the dam's foundations. And the erosion was not just vertical, it was horizontal, a process engineers call regressive erosion. The back wall of the crater was being eaten away, inching backward, toward the concrete base of the dam itself. If that erosion continued unchecked, if it were to undermine the rock supporting the dam's foundation, the entire structure could be compromised. The elegant arch, so dependent on its anchor points in the gorge walls, would lose its footing. The result would be catastrophic structural failure. The Zambezi River Authority, the binational organization co-owned by Zambia and Zimbabwe that manages the dam, stated it plainly. Should the plunge pool continue to erode towards the dam foundation, the safety of the dam would be compromised. The need for intervention to limit the erosion is therefore imperative. It was not a question of if, but when. And what would happen if the dam failed is a scenario that keeps hydrologists and disaster planners awake at night. It would not be a flood. It would be an inland tsunami. 180 billion tons of water released in a single cataclysmic wave, roaring down the Zambezi River Valley. This wave would overwhelm everything in its path, endangering an estimated 3.5 million people in Zambia, Zimbabwe, and most critically, Mozambique, which lies further downstream. But the catastrophe would not stop there. This is a disaster with a domino effect. Approximately 400 kilometers downstream from Kariba sits the Cahora Bassa Dam in Mozambique. It is the second largest dam in Africa, another colossal structure. It was not designed to withstand a flood wave of the magnitude Kariba's failure would produce. The consensus among engineers is that the failure of Kariba would almost certainly trigger the subsequent failure of Cahora Bassa, releasing its own massive reservoir and compounding the disaster on an almost biblical scale. The combined flood wave would obliterate downstream communities, wipe out Mozambique's vast agricultural lowlands, and pour into the Indian Ocean, leaving a path of destruction over 1,300 kilometers long. Beyond the horrifying human toll, the economic impact would be devastating. The two dams together provide a huge portion of southern Africa's electricity, including the 1,830 megawatts from Kariba alone. Their destruction would cripple the power grids of multiple nations, plunging the region into darkness, and bringing industry to a halt. It would be a humanitarian, economic, and ecological disaster of continental proportions. The slow, patient work of erosion, happening in darkness 90 meters underwater, had put the future of an entire region at risk. Something had to be done. But what could be done? How do you repair the foundations of a 128-meter-high dam while it's holding back the world's largest man-made lake? You can't drain the lake. It's the lifeblood of two nations' economies. You can't stop the river. The plan that emerged was one of the most audacious and high-risk civil engineering projects ever conceived. The Kariba Dam Rehabilitation Project, or KDRP, was formally launched in 2017 with a budget of approximately $294 million, funded by a consortium of international partners, including the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and the European Union. This wasn't just a repair job, it was an international effort to prevent a regional destabilization event. The project had two main components. The first was to refurbish the aging spillway gates to ensure they could be operated safely in an emergency. The second, and far more complex, was to fix the plunge pool. The goal was not to fill the 90-meter hole, but to reshape it. To blast and excavate the rock at the bottom to create a series of steps. A new engineered profile that would dissipate the energy of the falling water safely, preventing any further erosion back toward the dam's foundations. I know we've mentioned it, and maybe this is the second time you're hearing it, but an astonishing number of people who make it this far in our videos still haven't subscribed. If you're still watching, you're clearly one of us. You appreciate the depth. Hit the button. It's a click for you, but it's our entire lifeline. The contract for this high-wire act was awarded to the French engineering firm Razelbeck. Their first task was to get to the bottom of the plunge pool. To do that, they had to build a temporary dam, a coffer dam, downstream to hold back the Zambezi River, allowing the plunge pool area to be dewatered. Construction on this coffer dam began in July 2022. By October 23, it was complete, and for the first time in over 60 years, the bottom of the plunge pool was exposed to the air. What it revealed was the raw power of water, a landscape of scoured, shattered rock. Now, the truly dangerous work could begin. Blasting. Engineers had to use controlled explosions to break up and remove hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of rock, just a few hundred meters from the foundation of a fully loaded operational arch dam. The dangers are almost impossible to overstate. Every single blast had to be meticulously calculated. The vibrations sent through the rock had to be kept below strict limits, constantly monitored by an array of sensors. A blast that was too powerful, a vibration that exceeded the threshold, could potentially damage the dam's foundation or the wall itself, creating a new crisis while trying to solve the old one. Felix Boglietti, the project director for Razelbeck, described the challenge perfectly. It's an amazing project, quite unique. You have to blast right at the foot of a dam that is in operation. Every day, every blast is a challenge. You have to ensure that you are within the vibration limits in order not to damage the dam. It is the engineering equivalent of performing open-heart surgery on a running athlete. Each blast is a calculated risk. Each excavation is a move in a high-stakes chess match against geology and physics. By May of 2024, the Zambezi River Authority reported that the plunge pool reshaping was over 60% complete. The engineering appears to be working. The impossible is being made possible. While the dramatic work of blasting continued in the drained plunge pool, the second phase of the project was running in parallel. It was less spectacular, but no less critical. The 6 spillway gates, each a massive steel barrier, were over 60 years old. The chains, the lifting mechanisms, the gantry crane that moves overhead, all of it was original 1950s technology. Over the decades, distortion and corrosion had taken their toll. There were serious concerns that in a true emergency, during a catastrophic flood event, the gates might not operate reliably. They could get stuck, either open or closed. If they were stuck closed during a biblical flood, water could overtop the dam wall itself, a scenario that would lead to a different but equally certain type of dam failure. If they were stuck open, operators would lose the ability to manage the reservoir and downstream flows. So the KDRP also involves a complete refurbishment of this system, replacing the emergency gate, the chains, and building a brand new gantry crane. It's the meticulous, unglamorous work of ensuring that the dam's safety features actually function when they are needed most. The entire project, both the plunge pool reshaping and the spillway refurbishment, is on track for completion around 2025. It is a monumental success of international cooperation and engineering prowess. They identified the flaw. They designed a solution, and they are executing it against all odds. But the story does not end there, because the dam was designed for a world that no longer exists. The engineers are fixing the flaw in the original design. They are addressing the legacy of Andre Coyne's spillways, but they cannot fix the weather. The single greatest threat multiplier for the Kariba Dam, and for every large dam on Earth, is climate change. The climate models for southern Africa are not ambiguous. They point toward a future of greater extremes, deeper, more prolonged droughts, punctuated by more intense, more violent flood events. This new reality puts Kariba Dam in an impossible position. During drought periods, the massive reservoir becomes even more critical for water supply and power generation, increasing the economic pain when levels are low. But the bigger floods are the more insidious threat. The spillway gates, which were used relatively infrequently for the first few decades of the dam's life, will likely be needed more often to manage these extreme flood events. Every time they are used, they pour water into the newly reshaped plunge pool. The new design is meant to handle this force, but it is still putting a system under stress more frequently than its original designers ever envisioned. The KDRP is a fix for the problem of the 20th century. But is it ready for the climate of the 21st? The success of the rehabilitation project is real. The engineering is working. The immediate threat of the regressive erosion is being neutralized. This is the good snow year moment from the Las Vegas story. A moment of real tangible progress that seems to pull the system back from the brink. But like that story, it is a victory against a symptom, not the underlying cause. The larger forces at play, a changing climate, the fundamental pressure of a massive artificial lake on a geologically active area, are not going away. The project is resetting the clock on the dam's structural integrity. It is not stopping the clock of geological time or atmospheric physics. I know, it's me again. Your friendly neighborhood subscribe reminder. But seriously, if you made it to the very end of this deep dive, you owe it to your own curiosity to subscribe. We do this every single week. Don't miss the next one. What began as a monument to colonial power in the 1950s has become a profound test of post-colonial responsibility in the 2020. Zambia and Zimbabwe, the two nations that inherited this concrete giant, are now bound together, forced into a complex partnership to manage a shared resource and a shared risk. They are paying to fix a flawed masterpiece they did not build, to protect their people from a catastrophe they did not create. The project demonstrates a new model of cooperation, backed by a global community that understands that a dam failure in southern Africa is not a local problem. In our interconnected world, the wave from a failed Kariba Dam would be felt in the energy markets, supply chains, and political stability of nations thousands of miles away. The concrete wall is holding back more than just water. It is holding the line for regional stability. The engineers are buying time. Time for new energy solutions to be developed. Time for climate adaptation strategies to be implemented. Time for the nations along the Zambezi to build a future that is less dependent on this single, beautiful, terrifying structure. The question that remains, the one that hangs in the mist over the reshaped plunge pool, is whether that time will be enough. The blasting will stop, the new concrete will cure, the dam will be declared safe. But the river will keep flowing, the earth will keep shifting, and the sky will keep changing. Did the engineers at Kariba just perform one of the most audacious structural rescues in modern history? Or did they just pour $300